So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have three members from TOMA-Now, or Tomorrow Matters Now, joining us. We have Jaisheila, Philisiwe, and Silindokuhle. So we're very excited to hear from them today. You are also welcome to contact us if you have any questions after today's live session or any questions after watching the recordings from the previous sessions. That is all the introductory matters I have for today. So I'm going to hand over now. Jaisheila, when you're ready to share your screen, you are welcome to do so. And then I'm going to hand over to the TOMA-Now team. I see the slides are up and we can see you, Jaisheila.
Perfect. My team members will also be turning on their video shortly so that you have an opportunity to see all of us. I first want to start off to say a big thank you from all of us at TOMA-Now to SST for this opportunity to share some insights as far as the circular economy goes. I'm joined by Silindokuhle and Philisiwe, who will give you a quick overview in terms of the circular economy. So here's what our game plan is for today. We'll talk about the circular economy from the role of the perspective of from policy to implementation. The idea essentially behind it is that we want to be able to start out by giving you a little bit of an overview as far as the circular economy goes. But before we jump into the details, let's tell you a little bit about us. At TOMA-Now, which is short for Tomorrow Matters Now, we are a green economy consultancy. We are headquartered in Cape Town, but we pretty much exist throughout the country itself. You'll find out that the team members are spread across South Africa at the moment. We've been active across South Africa, the African continent, and we have a nice growing partnership in Europe as well. We're trying to enter that Asian market, so keep your fingers crossed for us. In the work that we do, we essentially advise leading companies, industry bodies, NGOs in terms of developing viable green economy strategies. Our approach is to look at life cycle thinking. At TOMA-Now, we're value chain specialists. And what that means is that gives us license to look at solutions holistically, not just single point at where they originate, but look at the entire system of how it fits together. We've put together for you some key offerings of what happens at TOMA-Now. We have our value chain mapping, which is one of our flagship offerings. We do market intelligence, which is essentially research towards the development of strategy. We also have our own stakeholder engagement tool. It's called the ACT Tank. So it's a play on think tank, but the idea is that we are action oriented. And ACT stands for Agile, Creative, and Tangible. We use design thinking principles and human-centered design to be able to engage from a stakeholder perspective, to make sure that our stakeholders' voices are heard when it comes to developing solutions. And then finally, quite importantly, you obviously realize that data anywhere, particularly in the green economy space, is incredibly important. And for that, we have our own tool as well for data visualization to support our clients in terms of making those critical decisions. And for us, that's called Metrics That Matter. So that's a quick introduction in terms of who we are at TOMA-Now. In the next few slides, Silindokuhle and Philisiwe will give you a quick introduction into the circular economy and how you could be able to benefit from that.
Thank you, Jaisheila. Good morning, everyone. My name is Silindokuhle. Philisiwe and I will take you through the presentation looking at the circular economy from how do we move from policy to implementation. In the presentation, we will take you through what is the circular economy. We'll give you a brief presentation, statement of what is the current problem that we face with the linear economy, and we'll look at some policy interventions from an international as well as national perspective. Then finally, we'll take you through a few examples of how the circular economy can be implemented in waste management using some case studies. So what is the circular economy and what does it mean, in terms of waste management? So the circular economy is a systemic approach to the control and reduction of waste within the manufacturing and operation of business. The idea is to design products that can be reused, reduced, and in some way recycled once they are no longer fit for their original use. After which, in some way, they can be fed back into production so that the materials do not end up as waste. In the current linear economy paradigm, the progression of materials is that they are extracted from natural resources, and once they've been manufactured and used by the consumers, they end up as waste discarded in landfills. What the circular economy, how the circular economy operates, it focuses on three main principles, which include creating manufacturing systems that no longer produce waste or pollution, choosing materials based on their reuse value rather than materials that have limited viability, and using power sources and materials that are renewable. So we're currently working, in a linear economy system where we see a lot of unsustainable production and consumer patterns. And these are the root cause of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution, which are of global concern. The reliance on, the global reliance on natural resources has increased by over 65% between the years 2000 and 2019. Now, this is astronomical. Plastic pollution, particularly, is of great environmental concern globally. And we see high generation of plastic pollution with over 400 million tons being produced on an annual basis globally. Now, we currently have about 75% to 75 million to 200 million tons of plastic waste already existing in our oceans, and this is huge. So what have been some of the interventions since we've seen this pollution that it continues to rise? Yes, from a global community perspective, having noted the increase in plastic pollution and the environmental impact of this problem, the global community has come together to develop the UN Plastic Treaty. Now, the treaty will focus on three areas, namely strategy, design, and cooperation. In terms of strategy, the treaty will focus on highlighting a variety of strategies that can be employed to deal with plastics throughout their life cycle so as to avoid and minimize waste. And in terms of design, the designs will reflect the reusability and recyclability of products and materials. And then the treaty will also put an emphasis on the need for improved international cooperation. This will help to ease, access to technologies, capacity building, and scientific and technical cooperation. Now, coming to the national level. From a national perspective, South Africa has in place the National Circular Economy Strategy. This was put in place so as to focus in two areas, that is waste minimization and the promotion of sustainable materials. The circular economy strategy itself focuses on three areas, namely equitable economic growth, job creation, and innovation. In terms of equitable economic growth, the implementation of a circular economy strategy offers great prospects for South Africa in terms of equitable economic growth, job creation, and the adoption of environmentally sound practices. Now, from the job creation, we know that approximately 80 to 90% of the waste that comes from paper and packaging that is recovered comes from waste pickers. And the circular economy strategy puts an emphasis on the need for waste pickers to be integrated into the circular waste economy and to ensure that they are compensated fairly. And in terms of innovation, South Africa is looking at, dealing with waste more than just when it reaches the end of life. We want to be able to tackle waste from from production, manufacturing, and at each stage of the value chain. Now, there has been some, innovation in terms of improving and reducing waste from the manufacturing perspective. A new technology was developed in Durban that is focused at reducing the cost of bleaching in production of dissolving pulpwood. And this was successfully implemented by a biorefinery facility in Durban. This biorefinery facility focuses on the forestry industry as a source of biomass. And what typically happens in the production of paper is that only 30% of the tree is used in production. Now, that is a tremendous amount that goes to waste, approximately 70%. Now, with the implementation of this new strategy, up to 90% of the tree can be used in the production of paper. And that is a significant improvement. Now, for the next few slides, Philisiwe will take us through some examples of the implementation of the circular economy for waste using case studies. Thank you.
Greetings to you all. As Silindokuhle has explained, I'll be taking you through the impact of circular economy for waste by looking at a few case studies. The first case study is about Kwamash Materials Beneficiation Center, which was established by Green Corridors, an NGO that is based in Durban. Pollution, waste collection, and waste management are some of the challenges that the communities of Durban are currently faced with. The center then came up with an intervention to tackle this issue. Unrecyclable plastic waste, which is plastic that is too dirty to be recycled, that is collected from the tributaries along the Umgeni River, and then it is mixed with crushed glass bottles to create pavers, which are used for walkways. These pavers are sold to create sustainable income for local community members, and they are also donated to underprivileged schools that are around the community of Durban. Before the intervention took place, we had a highly polluted environment, and from that, we were able to create a product that is very beautiful and sustainable, which also doesn't compromise on quality. Moving on to the next case study, which is about Dell Technologies. Due to the growing issue of plastic pollution in the marine environment, Dell started an ocean plastic initiative, which started in 2016. The first study was carried out in Haiti, which also faces problems of plastic pollution in the ocean. Dell then came up with an initiative to collect these ocean-bound plastics and then process it and then mix it with other recycled materials to create model trays, which they use as packaging materials for their products. The reason these ocean-bound plastics are mixed with other recycled materials is to ensure that the quality of the product is not compromised. These trays consist of 25% ocean-bound plastics, as well as 100% recycled plastic. A result of this is that waste is kept away from the environment and it is retained in the economy. Before we had a highly polluted marine environment, and from there, a product that is beautiful and sustainable was created from it. Looking at the third case study, which is about Grounded People. Grounded People is an innovative apparel company that is based in Canada. This company recognized that the consumption of products in the fashion industry poses a threat on the environment. They then decided to create shoes from recycled tires. The laces and upper parts of the shoes are made from 100% recycled cotton. The sole of the khaki shoes are made from gum trees, while the sole of the black shoes are made from recycled tires. This example shows that there's more products that we can utilize to create new products from them. The focus is not only on plastics. it is important to use materials that have already been produced and to upcycle them to find new purpose for them.
So what we've done is that we've given you a super quick snapshot of the circular economy. We wanted to be able to show you that this industry and this space has lots of potential, particularly for a country like South Africa, from a socioeconomic perspective. We wanted to be able to show you that there are quite a number of policies that can be utilized as interventions, both on a global perspective as well as on a national perspective. There's a fair amount of work that's taking place in this direction to create that enabling environment. But as we all know, you can have the most sophisticated legislature in the world, but this makes no difference unless you focus on implementation. That really being the cornerstone for a successful circular economy, as it is with any of the other aspects that we're looking at. Having that enabling environment is something that can actually help support the breeding of innovation. We're talking about things along the lines that we're using secondary materials or waste materials to be able to make new products. We know that this is quite a difficult space to navigate, especially because if you want to be able to produce anything on a mass scale, you must be able to look at things from a supply chain development. So the fact that we have been able to show you some innovative case studies is quite important, at least from our perspective, because what it essentially means is that opportunity exists. And we've shown you mainstream products, and that really is the critical point. These products are attractive. They are products that you find in the mainstream marketplace. And this is quite key, because quite often when the discussion comes up around any products made out of secondary materials, it's somehow thought to be of inferior quality. And that very much is not the case. You wouldn't see these products, especially being endorsed by large brands, if it was the case. So this means that we need an emphasis on education and awareness. Education when it comes to skills development, because we need a slightly different skill set when it comes to dealing with these particular materials. We have a chance to be able to do this at scale, and the legislature that we have in South Africa fully endorses this particular aspect. But none of this is possible if we don't actually couple it together with consumer awareness. Awareness that these products exist, an awareness that there's nothing inferior about it, an awareness that it is actually supporting a bigger environmental cause. So essentially, this is what we want to be able to introduce to you. The fact that there's so many possibilities when it comes to the circular economy, the fact that these policies have been created, which are meant to act as an enabling environment, to ensure that these are successfully implemented, to be able to create a space for innovation, and then to be able to look at things from a socioeconomic perspective, from a job creation, from a reducing waste to landfill, from keeping resources in play for as long as possible, to the point of that we can prepare as sexy products as anything when it comes to the circular economy. And also, most importantly, that we emphasize that the circular economy is not just about plastics. There's much more to it. Think of any resource that is out there and look at the opportunity of how we can be able to keep it in play for that much longer. We'd like to actually take a moment to pause right now for any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the whole team. It's great to get an overview of some of the examples that you mentioned. The only question that has come through so far was someone requesting that we send through the link to the South African National Circular Economy Strategy, which we will certainly do in just a moment. But in the meantime, while some other questions are generated, for the team at large, can any of you expand a little bit on sort of TOMA-Now's role within the circular economy? Are you acting across all the three main pillars that you mentioned in terms of circular economy, and perhaps and it might also be worth maybe mentioning if within the value chain mapping, if there are any particular key areas across the value chain that are the most facing the most number of challenges, not necessarily problematic areas, but ones that require larger interventions or more strategic interventions. That was a bit of a long question. Apologies.
That's an incredibly long question, so I'm going to start it off, and I'm sure that the team members will add as we go along. So essentially, TOMA-Now is active when it comes to the circular economy. Our umbrella is essentially the green economy, and we see the circular economy as being something that is an enabler. It's an opportunity to be able to build an inclusive economy. As I mentioned at the beginning, from our perspective, we work in the business of sustainability. And when we say that, we want to be able to specifically highlight, quite often people think that sustainability is just one thing, which it should only be about the environment, or it should only be about CSR. We tend to actually take a much more holistic view to be able to say that economics should very much form a part of this. So in terms of where we are active, pretty much across the board, the way that we work is that we are sector agnostic. And because we're doing work on a governmental level where a number of these policies are being developed, we also work on an industry level and an industry body level that allows us to be able to cross over in quite a number of different spaces. So we're active pretty much across the entire value chain to be able to address this. And what that means is that we are in a very unique position. We're in a place where we can essentially take a 360-degree view of a particular problem because we can see how the legislature is being developed. And right now, as an example, we're doing a strategic review of the waste instruments for the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment from a national perspective. Yes, I got that right. From a national perspective. So that allows us to give an overview in terms of what's happening. At the same time, we're doing some work for SST, looking at an economic impact assessment for an actual on-the-ground implementation when it comes to setting up programs to reduce the amount of landfill waste that's being sent to landfill. So we really get a chance to be able to look at this holistically. And in terms of the main challenge areas, what it specifically highlights is collection. Without the supply chain in place, we need essentially an effective pull strategy so that we can pull the part of new products being developed, utilizing these secondary materials. So what that means is that if I am a manufacturer and I want to be able to produce my products and I want to be able to use secondary resources, I need to plan for this. I need to be able to plan that we have enough volume of these materials coming in. I know where my sources are coming in. I have almost guaranteed supply, if you look at it that way, which means that we need a much more concerted focus when it comes to the idea of collection to funnel the materials to the places that it needs to be. That, in my opinion, is one of the key areas that we should be focusing on. Silindokuhle, I'm not sure, did you want to add something over there?
That pretty much covers it. I think maybe we can also add the example that we're doing for the Western Cape government, where we're also looking at the situational analysis in terms of the e-waste sector, specifically looking at repair and refurbishment, which is also a very important component of, creating circularity of materials and products. So yeah, we really work across the board and across the whole value chain. And I think there needs to be a consideration as we do the step change into looking at recyclable materials, because I remember, Jaisheila, we had this discussion where we saw a battery company that is producing battery that are about 99% recyclable, and we had the question, do we have the facilities in place to recycle these projects once they reach end of life? So that's another consideration of having looked at things from a value chain perspective and not just a single stage within the value chain.
Wonderful.
That's very much it. Sorry, just to round it off. That's very much it. There's so much that's taking place right now where we need technical skills, we need technology, but also in the study that Silindokuhle mentioned as far as the e-waste part of it goes, the Western Cape government would like to promote the development of the repair and refurbish sector, but we need adequate data to be clear in terms of what volumes are out there, where do they actually exist. So these types of things are quite key to be able to have a successful development of the circular economy.
All right. Sorry. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing some of those examples. It sounds like an incredibly well-rounded approach to addressing the number of issues. And interesting that you mentioned that sort of collection is one of the key issues within the value chain, which is which makes a lot of sense. I see we have had a few more questions coming through in the Q&A box. The one is asking about if you have had any experience or any advice on addressing products such as baby nappies, and perhaps if you have done any sort of research on the replacements with single use or reusable comparisons with those particular items.
With baby nappies, actually, weird enough, it hasn't come up. Last year, we were involved with a review of the chemical and waste pakisa, and that was a topic that came up in terms of superabsorbents. And the idea is, obviously, that's the active ingredient in terms of the nappies. With that, really, there's a lot more focus that needs from a technology perspective. We've heard some interesting stories and applications from other parts of the world, where the idea is that from the nappy, you could actually take out the superabsorbent, and because it retains a high degree of moisture, we've heard stories of people being able to grow potatoes in almost desert-like conditions because the superabsorber in the nappy holds onto the moisture like crazy. So I guess this whole story in terms of being able to have a potato farm in Mars might be a possibility if we look at nappies and the active ingredient of the superabsorber.
Very interesting. It's not an application I would have thought of. On that note, it's great to sort of have a more sort of holistic approach to the circular economy. Does that generally entail addressing alternatives? Often sort of the more eco-friendly alternatives that are promoted don't always seem to, well, one might be concerned that they don't always address the implications that those alternatives could have, as sort of using an example, whether it's your reusable carrier bags compared to the not single use, but your usual plastic bags, or whether it be sort of glass or metal water bottle alternatives. Does your work include a lot of assessment on the comparative options on the market?
Sorry, I was just about to go, but I saw that Silindokuhle wanted to say something.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so from our side, what normally actually happens is that occasionally there are discussions around technology, right? So we've had situations, for example, where a brand owner may have wanted to reduce the amount of packaging that they are generating. So what happens is that we start having a look at the types of packaging that they have, and sometimes it's something as simple as standardization, looking at a standard weight, and it becomes a simple solution that can be implemented quick and easy from that perspective. In other cases, looking at it from a completely different perspective, but now this time around from a natural resources perspective, we have been involved in programs and projects looking at biomass beneficiation. So the idea is that biomass represents carbon, and how could you be able to actually utilize this to get maximal benefit out of it? We have been involved quite actively around alien vegetation biomass beneficiation. And basically, in a nutshell, it means the eradication of alien vegetation, which tend to consume a lot more water than the natural indigenous species. So the idea behind it essentially is that we would look at the biomass itself, look at what the local captive needs are in a certain radius, and then say, what is the technology that can be able to address this? And from a technology perspective, we'd look at more than one single application. So the idea is that, say, for argument's sake, it would be able to generate energy, but aside from energy, perhaps it can also make biochar so that it has multiple uses. And so therefore, the cost is justified, the return on investment is definitely there as we look at it from a viability perspective. So it does come up from time to time.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I was just waiting to see if anyone else would like to add anything. But I see we have another question that's come through saying the examples were great and very interesting. However, what can be done on a much smaller scale towards implementing a circular economy? For example, anyone at home, And are there any facilities where household waste can be dropped off and used in the context of the circular economy?
This is something that we're working on at the moment in the example that Silindokuhle had mentioned as far as the situation analysis goes on e-waste. We'd like to be able to actually actively promote that to keep the resources in play for as long as possible. So what we're doing right now is that we're looking at what is this current status quo in the Western Cape when it comes to household electrical and electronic appliances, to be able to find ways to get them to be repaired or refurbished so that they stay in play as long as possible. And in the case that they need to be recycled, how can they be stripped out and possibly parts for reuse harvested from this? So this is small, simple examples of where we could be able to utilize existing facilities like drop-off facilities or buyback centers or these types of things to be able to engage further on that particular perspective. Beyond that, and looking at it from a recycling perspective, there's a lot of work that's being done right now in terms of drop-off facilities or collection as far as recyclables go. What we wanted to actually emphasize here is much more than plastic, which is why we bring up the e-waste example in particular. Mm-hmm. Oh, one last thing very quickly. So I heard this really funny story. Okay, so nerd alert. Apparently I'm the only one who's going to think it's funny. For many of us, if you buy a glass jar of something, right, chances are, like jam or something like this, chances are you'll use up the jam, and when it's done, you'll use the bottle again or the container for something else. At least this is what I actively do. And surprise, this is circular economy. And so there is this really interesting thing that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation does not define that as circular unless you refill the container with jam. If you refill it with chocolates, it's not circular. Did you know this?
That's a very interesting tidbit. I would have assumed that that was still fulfilling its containment requirements to be circular, but very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing on that and expanding on more than sort of the other sectors of waste in the economy. For the attendee who did submit that question, you can also visit the Sustainable Seas Trust website. We do have a map that does pinpoint various recyclers within South Africa and Africa as a whole, but there is a lot more information sort of on the map about South African recyclers. You may be able to find a drop-off facility near or convenient for you on the map. Okay.
Could I add something else to this? And that is that look at your food waste as well. You can do your own home composting, and in the own home composting, you can actually take the compost that you generate yourself and use it directly into your garden and plants. And if you're growing vegetables, it basically makes it a circular loop, especially from a carbon perspective.
Yeah, and I think also, with the upcoming landfill ban on food waste, that will become quite critical so that we know what to do with the food waste that we produce in our homes. So yeah, they're quite interesting examples that we see where people compost their own food waste and use it in their gardening. So yeah.
So many of the solutions start in the home as a yeah. Okay, and then there's another question that's come through saying, how does TOMA-Now make sure that sustainable materials are really sustainable ones?
Well, this is an interesting one. So this is actually quite a tricky one because it requires a degree of analysis behind it. So partly the way that it works is that from a legislative support perspective, what this means is that we're looking at the nature of the virgin materials entering the chain already. And we're looking at how it's utilized and how it's actually going into it from a design perspective to make the products that we are utilizing. So that's the starting point, right? But aside from that, what we actively are looking at is that what is happening with those materials. So in the example that Philisiwe had mentioned regarding the example in KwaZulu-Natal, and the making of the manufacturing of the pavers, essentially what was happening in that particular example is that plastics were being harvested, and some of these could be recycled, but there are some that could not be recycled with the current technology that we have. And for that, the solution was to say, well, we don't just send it to landfill, we could still be able to utilize it for preparing something else, right? So yes, there are questions with regard to the sustainability behind various things and whether or not you're trapping a resource in there in a moment in time. There are definitely debates in the scientific community when it comes to that side of things. But the way that we're looking at it is to be able to say technology could originate at a later stage where we could be able to look at the reuse of these materials. But as long as we're able to keep it in play for as long as possible, that is our focus.
Thank you for that. There is another question that's come through saying, great presentation, thank you so much. And Jaisheila, you mentioned in Europe, what are the main, you mentioned some examples of your consultation in Europe. Can you expand a little bit on the main differences between the South Africa and the EU and what we can learn from each other?
I'm going to let Silindokuhle get started, and then I'll jump in on this.
Perfect.
I think the main differences between, SA and the EU is that the EU is a little bit ahead and we are still trying to catch up. We recently had an engagement with the WE Forum, which is based in the EU. I think South Africa is catching up quite nicely. We have the legislature in place, which is the main point or the starting point for an enabling environment. And I think what we need right now is education and awareness, as well as to give ourselves time, because, the application and the implementation of these things take time for consumers to start to think, more eco-friendly when they look at the products that they buy, and developing a consumer that is eco-conscious, it takes time. So that was one of the advice that we got from the WE Forum, but also just creating education and awareness around, the products that are, I would say, produced from secondary materials, but not really secondary in the sense that they have less quality. We need to promote that the emphasis on creating a circular economy does not lead to a compromise on the quality of the products that are being produced. And we need to educate the consumer on that as well.
So if I were to add to this, we're definitely catching up when it comes to legislature, but there's one critical difference that we need to be aware of, especially when it comes to the design of these particular products. When it comes to Europe, we have a concentration of these products in these countries, which means that they have an opportunity to use economies of scale to put pressure on brand owners to make certain changes. We don't have the luxury of that in South Africa. We need to be very much aware of this and mindful of this. In addition to that, certain products because they are released at a later stage in South Africa, it means that sometimes they become obsolete much sooner, and we don't have enough time in terms of the lifespan of the project itself. So this is something that we need to be aware of. In terms of the legislative side, the way that I see it is that we're an interesting mix of things. Europe wants to be able to make a shift to a full-scale circular economy across the board into their supply chains, etc. And a lot of the resources and raw materials are coming out of Africa, which means that there's a lot of exchanges that are taking place between Europe and various countries in Africa in terms of the growth and development of circular economy and circular economy principles. Having said that, there is a lot that's actually taking place in South Africa. We're just getting on with it. And as we do the work that we're doing, we're constantly uncovering new and exciting examples that are out there. And it's simply that the language of this is circular economy is something that people are sometimes not aware of. So it simply is, this is how we normally do business, whereas in other parts of the world, they specifically call it out and say, this is an example of the circular economy. So I'd say essentially, it's pretty much a mixed bag in terms of where we are along the lines. But there is something that I should point out as an interesting comment that came out of our discussion with the WE Forum that Silindokuhle referenced. And that is that as you put in all these fancy legislature and these incentives and all of these types of things, at the end, the decision very much lies with the end consumer. And what that means is that if the end consumer doesn't want this product and they want new, they'll buy new regardless. And it doesn't matter where in the market you are. And we need to be mindful of this. And we need to be able to highlight that there's nothing inferior associated with these products. That is actually a commonality that we have in both Europe and in South Africa based on the discussions that we've had.
Okay, very interesting. And thank you for the comment at the end there and the sort of power of the consumer choice. You mentioned the legislation. Thank you again as well for mentioning the UN Plastics Treaty in your presentation. Can you comment on the implications and the applications that we'll have in South Africa in terms of our legislation, but in particular the application and the sort of uptake of those, not necessarily for plastic specifically, but for sort of circular models and things like that, just in terms of the trends that South Africa is taking towards circularity?
Sorry, did you want to get started on that, Silindokuhle? I know that you put the things together, so I didn't want to just jump in there.
Please jump in.
Okay, so when it comes to this, these pieces are meant to talk to each other. We have the SA Plastics Pact. Sorry, I think we have some connectivity issues, so we just lost Philisiwe, but we'll carry on in the meantime. So the way that it actually works is that in an ideal situation, they're all talking to each other, right? We're at a point where these pieces are part of various forums. The SA Plastics Pact is speaking into a larger body. There's a lot of activities that are going. Even when we have the extended producer regulations that we have right now, we are looking at other countries in terms of where they are, how the development is, etc. We're mindful of the things that are taking place, and we're looking around constantly in terms of best practice, but also lessons learned in terms of the adoption. So that's a very long answer to the question itself. And I would say the short answer is time will tell, because it's a constantly evolving space and it's a moving target. There's certain things that we need to be able to do as far as keeping our resources in play. There's certain things that we need to do in terms of addressing climate change impacts. There's certain things that we need to actually do in terms of how we are harnessing our resources. So this is something that is constantly evolving. And this is at least one of the things that we can say from a South African perspective, is that there is a fair amount of discussion and representation that's going on in South Africa, on the African continent, and as well as on a global basis. So that's essentially where we are right now.
Thank you so much. Silindokuhle, did you want to comment or add to that in any way?
No, that sums it up quite nicely.
Okay, just wanted to give you the opportunity to comment there. I see we have already met the 12 o'clock mark. So there is one more question. I think we can make this the last one. The question is addressed to Philisiwe, who I think has dropped off due to some internet connectivity issues, but I hope that the rest of the team is able to comment perhaps. The question is asking about the example mentioned specifically for the Dell using recycled plastic for the trays in their packaging for their various gadgets and items. And can you comment on how environmentally friendly the process of recycling these plastics is?
So as far as we know, they're using mechanical recycling, which is the main type of recycling that we utilize here in South Africa. So if we look at it from a parity perspective, it's pretty much the same as how we go about doing the recycling over here. The main focus from their side was to be able to support the harvesting of marine plastics. That was really the key driver behind it. The other part of it is that there are studies that are taking place at the moment with regard to looking at doing a preliminary life cycle assessment to be able to understand what the full impacts are and to be able to actually look at it across the board with the various products as different types of materials are implemented. I'm speaking under correction. but I know that there are a number of brand owners that are taking place in a study where there's a screening type of life cycle assessment that's taking place, just to give a preliminary indication as they look into their various products, to be able to, as in this example, we're looking at it from a packaging perspective. But if we were to be able to look at it as incorporating into the main product itself, that there are some screening assessments that are taking place. So I can't give you the definitive where do we stand right now in terms of a measurement from a life cycle perspective on their side. I can only tell you that the markers are that they support the harvesting of the marine plastics, and so that these materials are not just sitting in limbo, that these are then being utilized in turn. And as far as I'm aware, it's standard mechanical recycling that's taking place, which is something that we're quite familiar with, as opposed to the chemical recycling. And there is some sort of screening life cycle assessments taking place. I'm just not sure if this product is part of that study.
Sure. And so thank you so much. So basically a case of finding a use for the plastics rather than just removing them from the marine environment and sending them straight to landfill. More of a way of finding a use for them after they've been extracted. And it is very encouraging to hear that it is specifically marine plastic that's being used for these, and not so that it is plastic being taken out of the environment rather than in addition to plastic that has been collected for recycling. Okay.
They're not the only ones. There's quite a number of brands that are doing exactly that. Maybe not using marine harvested plastics, but looking at stuff from a landfill perspective as well. So there's a lot of activity happening in this space.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, but if anyone does have questions at a later stage, you're welcome to email those through to us at webinars@sstafrica.org.za, and we'll pass those along to the TOMA-Now team. For now, I think we'll close off the session today. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to the TOMA-Now team. My thanks to Philisiwe as well in her absence. But thank you so much for taking the time to share TOMA-Now with us today and to share the examples of circularity. We really appreciate the time and the encouraging words and the holistic approach that you're taking throughout the value chain mapping and addressing multiple sectors through that methodology.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to close off the session here for today, and you'll be able to find the recording on YouTube later. Thank you again, all, and thank you especially to our TOMA-Now team. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.